Hello, I am Zoe Vexed. I make content that is LGBT+, and I make atheist secular content. If that sounds exciting to you, please click that subscribe button and hit that like button before we get into this. Now, last week, I absolutely went crazy on a children's cartoon about the empty tomb of Jesus. And I know a lot of people are probably like, oh, come on, Zoe. Like, that was a children's cartoon. You went so hard on that. And that was like ridiculous. And there was like no serious arguments in there or whatever else. It was just for fun. And I figured since I had gone so hard on a children's cartoon last time, maybe I will tackle something a bit more serious. And let's go after Dr. William Lane Craig. He produces a video series here. It's like Dr. Craig videos. And he goes into a much more like refined apologetics for Christ. Well, God, really. Let's get into it. God and mathematics. So you know it's more serious than a children's cartoon.
Does mathematics work? Think about it. Mathematical entities like numbers, sets, and equations are non-physical and abstract.
All right, they're non-physical and they're abstract. Numbers are basically, it's a human construction that is essentially like an alphabet for how we understand physics. That's kind of like, in a nutshell, I would argue like a fair definition for mathematics. We use it to create logical constructs.
It can't cause anything. Yet, for some reason, the physical universe operates mathematically.
Now, why? So I already have a problem with this. Why would you say, like, well, math doesn't cause anything? It's like, well, wait a minute. Are you insinuating by that? Like, I know that you don't mean like there's mathematics is going around like pushing things to happen, but I would say that like if you're talking cause and effect, like if you believe in causality, which I mean, if you're a Christian, you've got to, then isn't causation itself like cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect? It's like you're talking like motion and matter is essentially like what makes up our physical reality. That's why mathematics, it seems it has the appearance that math is causing things. It's not that math is causing anything. It's that all of our reality is in constant motion. And the more that we can accurately measure using our constructed systems of how to measure like the speed that something is going, the trajectory it has, all that sort of thing, we can come up with all sorts of neat predictions about it and everything else. Then upon investigation, sometimes we discover that we are correct. Like, hey, the bridge that we thought that would like hold all this weight and everything, it does. And now traffic can, travel across this like wide river with no problem. And every now and then, unfortunately, we also discover it doesn't work. Like when we have, tragically, like when we've lost like space shuttles and that sort of thing, and like massive accidents or engineering failures. I wouldn't say that math failed, but I would say is like our calculations were incorrect. So a lot of times apologists like to pretend that mathematics is like some type of like mystical property of the universe, whatever. And that's just not the case. It is simply a system of measurement. And like I said before, it is a construct that we use to explain logic.
As Galileo put it, the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics.
No. It's because we understand that that you have like basically the fundamental like laws of logic. And then we discovered that, hey, there's mathematics that can apply to explain how physics works. And then from physics, we get to nature, right? So because physics is accurate, and we understand that, because of like the principles behind physics, nature manifests in the way that it does. Therefore, it's kind of like, it's almost like a little diagram where you have like, one then the other than the other. So you have like pure like logic, reason, whatever. And then because we are rational creatures, we can imagine, we came up with the idea of systems of mathematics to explain physics. And then physics explains basically like why phenomena happen within nature.
Scientists do not use mathematics.
Now, I just want to be clear. I am not trying to sit up here and pretend to be like some great intellectual or whatever else. I have no advanced degrees, no PhDs, no nothing like that. I'm not a physicist. I have no degrees in like biology or whatever. I'm just like an asshole on the internet giving my opinion about things. So before anybody gets in the comments and like drops some like, I don't know, like a scientific dissertation about like why some opinion that I have about, no, trust me, I already fucking know. This is just my opinion, all right? If you have some other idea about like the way that I ought to explain things, or you think that I'm wrong about something, then by all means, like leave that in my comment section. I would actually like to be educated if I am incorrect about things. That's how we learn, right? So, scientists do not use mathematics merely as a convenient way.
Mathematics merely as a convenient way of organizing the data. They believe that mathematical relationships reflect real aspects of the physical world.
So yeah, we became aware that things are in motion and that we came up with systems to measure like the motion of that matter and the weight, quantity and everything else of things. It's just acknowledging that we recognize that, yeah, nature in and of itself is made of like things are made of smaller things and those things are made of smaller things and yada, 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 all until you get to like a quantum realm where all of a sudden, like some things like time itself starts to become a thing that's in question. Like the very nature that we experience things as like one event and then another event, then another event. And the way that our brains organize things as little Homo sapiens is that we recognize it as, oh, some time passed, when in fact, according to certain physicists these days, time in and of itself might be a nonsensical concept, which is kind of like mind-blowing to really get into, but I'll just let them go.
Science relies on the assumption that we live in an ordered universe that is subject to precise mathematical laws.
We do live not in an ordered universe, but I would say we live in a naturalistic universe. And it does seem that science, which is a methodology, it's not like a thing unto itself. It's simply a methodology about the way that we explore the universe around us. It is the most reliable methodology for getting us to true claim or truth, not claims, but truth in and of itself. And you could have claims that start off as like hypothesis or whatever, but then through further investigation, data collection, experiments, peer review, all this sort of thing, we do get to a better understanding of truth. You know what doesn't lead us to a better understanding of truth? God. The Bible. That doesn't get us to a better understanding of the physical universe or anything else, which is funny because it's Craig. I know that he's arguing all this stuff. He's building this up to basically say, oh, God, this is basically going to be like a teleological argument, some form of it. Like arguments from design and, nature or whatever. Like, oh, well, things are so flawlessly, mathematically perfect and all that kind of stuff. It's just not compelling because, like, how do we know? Like, we only have one universe to observe. So we don't know that the universe, things that could have been any other way than that they are. And because we only have one universe to observe, and we don't know if things could have been any other, any different, then we can't say, well, there clearly must have been an intelligent design, like an intelligent agent that picked this specific universe. What do you mean specific? Specific compared to what? There's no other universe to compare it to.
Thus, the laws of physics are all expressed as mathematical equations. For example, Pythagoras discovered that when a vibrating string is shortened by half, it plays the same note 1 octave higher. Isaac Newton's observations led to his discovery of the law of gravity.
All right, so this is like really getting close to like just a gish gallop here, because you're like, oh, well, you're talking about the string, and then you're like, oh, you discovered gravity and stuff like that. It's like, okay, make your point. All you're doing right now is basically you have like, you're just making observations. You're not getting to your point yet, but you're basically like getting really close to saying like all these other things that are only like tangentially related. Like, yep, those are all scientific observations that were, made at some point in history.
A mathematical relationship expressed as a simple equation that enabled us to enter the space age. Mathematics enabled astronomers to pinpoint the location of a previously undiscovered planet. And James Clerk Maxwell used mathematics to predict.
Yep. All you're doing is saying that math is really neat and that we've been able to make some pretty awesome predictions. Then, from those hypotheses of looking at nature itself, at nature, again, not looking at the Bible, not saying like, hey, what does the Bible say about like Neptune? Nothing like that. We have some hypothesis about the observed universe. Mathematically, this makes sense. This is what we probably ought to find with our limited understanding. And we go and investigate it. And guess what? We found out that we were correct. You're skipping all the times that we thought things with mathematics and it ended up being like not true. Or like, before there was like the concept of zero and stuff like that. Like, I don't see why you don't mention these things, because when you say like, oh, the concept of zero was developed, that seems very like banal. Like, well, I mean, that doesn't seem very important. It absolutely was hugely important, but you're just like, well, let's just talk about the really cool things, or the things that, make, you're going to build a case to be like, this is so intricately designed as much as possible. It's cherry picking.
Existence of radio waves. Albert Einstein, working with theoretical mathematics developed 50 years earlier, formulated his general theory of relativity, a pillar of modern physics.
Yeah, but we know that like some aspects of that theory were proven wrong. And we know this because other physicists that were, going out there and doing more of that pesky science discovered that certain aspects of it were correct, and then others weren't. So it's not just say like, oh, he just, recognized that there were some like, imaginary numbers out there. Then he just immediately was able to go and just piece together like every single like solution about the universe. That's not true. He was brilliant, absolutely, and 100% like, he's smarter than I'll ever be. But just saying, not everything that he said was true. So let's couch some of this in the like, this was our best understanding, not necessarily like, this is the case.
His calculations were later confirmed during a solar eclipse, when Arthur Eddington observed light from distant stars bending around the sun. Then, Peter Higgs used mathematical equations to predict the existence of an elementary particle. It took 48 years, billions of dollars, and millions of man-hours for experimental scientists to finally detect the Higgs boson.
I just really feel like we're going to get to like a God did it. Or like, it's like, we're this far into this video. We're like, and it's just going to go like near the end of it. They'll be like, oh, well, God. I thought my stream was crashing again. I was like, man, what is going on?
How do we explain the astonishing applicability of math to the physical world? In 1960, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist and mathematician Eugene Wigner published an article that stunned the scientific community entitled The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. Wigner concluded that the effectiveness of mathematics is a miracle, which we know
it could not qualify as a miracle. I'll explain this as I'll let them go a little bit
neither
more.
understand nor deserve. Why is mathematics so effective? Philosophers who address this question fall into two camps. Naturalists, who believe that all that exists.
All right, so before we get too much further, I'm going to address what you just said, this miracle, mathematics is a miracle bullshit. So first of all, most of the like modern physicists and that kind of stuff, majority of them are agnostic, or they are atheists. They are not theists. Most of them do not believe in a God. So if this is so convincing, then how come the people that are the most educated in the subject and work with this, advanced mathematics, imaginary numbers, all this kind of stuff, how come majority of them are non-believers? Like, if this argument is ought to compel the regular person, how come the people that work in these fields are not very convinced by it? So, because you're trying to basically like, oh, all these scientists and these brilliant minds and yada, yada, yada. All right. So that's like number one. So you're just basically like saying, oh, a bunch of smart people, agree that the universe has the appearance of design or being finely tuned or whatever. I wouldn't say design, finely tuned. My other problem is that whenever you say that mathematics is a miracle, I think more of what he was probably trying to say is it's just like miraculous that we've been able to figure out like, all these different like mathematical principles that work with physics so well, and like the marvels of accomplishments of like sending people in outer space and also that kind of stuff. Mathematics itself could not qualify as a miracle. And this is why. A miracle is like almost by definition a suspension of the natural order of things, right? Like the reason why you say like, well, like Christ resurrecting is a miracle is because as far as we know, people that die for, they've been dead for like 3 days, don't normally get back up and start walking around again. If Jesus like, put his hands on somebody that is like blind, and then all of a sudden just his touch, they can see again or whatever. Like it's things like this, walking on water, that are supposed to violate the natural order. And that is why it's a miracle. That's why it's miraculous. Otherwise, it would just be a mundane event, right? Mathematics couldn't qualify as that. Mathematics would be like literally part of the fabric. It's just the human construct that we've made to describe our observations of like physics and the interaction of particles and motion and matter and this kind of stuff, and the way that we quantify things and measure them, right? The fact that we just came up with a system that produces like constructs of logic, that does not make it a miracle. That's like by definition it's like the most mundane of the most mundane. Yeah, that's just part of the natural world itself. That's not a miracle. That's not a suspension of the natural order. It's part of the natural order. And naturalists right here, yeah, I would be in that camp as you're defining it.
Concretely is space-time and its physical contents. They exclude supernatural causes.
Yeah, because we can't. All right, we exclude supernatural causes, not because we're like, nope, it just doesn't exist. It can't be demonstrated, right? And you spent all this time on math and all this time on science tests and everything else, and you won't even talk about like why we have a problem with it. The problem is it's not demonstrable, and if you can't demonstrate it, then you're basically just saying that. Imagine if I just said like there's the quantum GRX force or something, and that force out there is responsible for everything that we understand to be like supernatural, and I start claiming that like ghosts and all sort of kind of stuff exist, and they exist in this like quantum GRX realm. Then I basically like give it all everything attributed to it is essentially no different than any other claims of like supernatural stuff. Oh, then you say, well, Zoe, can you like demonstrate this? I'm like, no, but a lot of people believe it. And there's a book that I wrote, and the book includes like characters that are from quantum, GRX, whatever. I don't find that very convincing. And it's like, well, the most educated people in the world disagree with this. Like, you've convinced some of them, but it's like, okay, well, what about the ones that were convinced? They're never convinced because of like scientific demonstrations. They're always convinced because they were, I was walking in the woods and I saw a waterfall frozen into 3 pillars and made me think of the Trinity, and I dropped to my knees and converted. That actually is like, that's a true story.
Who believe in a God who created the universe. Naturalists cannot provide a reasonable.
Okay, naturalists cannot provide a reasonable explanation, but the other side cannot provide God. Therefore, the other side also cannot provide a reasonable explanation by those standards.
Explanation for why mathematics applies to the physical world. It's just a happy coincidence. But this.
It doesn't even have to be. It doesn't even have to be a happy coincidence. It could be, and it's so weird. It's almost not. It's almost an insult to say it's a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the systems that we created to measure and explain the physics and the way that the universe interacts works. All right, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about to illustrate this. So there are different ways that you can measure land, right? We understand this, right? That there are, like you can say, there's miles or kilometers or there's acres or whatever else. Each one of those systems was arbitrary. Like we just decided that X amount of feet equals a mile, all right? And in ye olden days, they would use like chains and rods, and they would link chains and rods. This is in America. And they would measure out land, like acres and stuff, using that. And you can go, like you could take a modern day map, like of a property, and you could sit down and you could measure out with chains and rods, this property is whatever, 50 chains, wide by like 50 chains tall. And everyone knew that you meant like chain to rod kind of thing in this intersecting pattern. That would be total nonsense to somebody that has never heard of that system or know why we use it or anything else. It's completely arbitrary. And mathematics itself is just as arbitrary as that system. Like we could have called, instead of like chains and rods, we could have said that's, make up some number like that's, I don't know, quintuple and pluple. And it's like, and you have, quintuples next to perluples. And if you put them all together, then you end up with, your measurement of, whatever made up word you want to use. And it's like, that's because you're just explaining, like, as long as the system is coherent, we understand you mean that this, perluple and quintuple thing is like, X perluples wide. As long as other people understand that, and we have it like written down into a system that's been codified that people can use, I mean, it's just as good as any other mathematical system. It's just that over time, we refine mathematics more and more and more so that specific numbers are codified into a logical systems like matrices that people can understand. And it's become like used worldwide and everything else. Every language has their own like words for, different numbers and stuff like that. Like numbers are essentially just like an alphabet for logic. That's all it is. But you wouldn't say that, well, letters are just a happy coincidence. How do you explain names without God? It's like, well, people, we want to make noises when we refer to different objects, and we make specific noises referring to human beings as opposed to objects, and that those assimilated syllables we call names. And each culture and society and stuff has different like social norms for those names. But I wouldn't say like, oh, well, how do you explain having names if you don't have God? I don't know. It's really weird. Logic, like mathematics, is just the language of logic. I don't see why this is like mind-blowing.
This is no explanation at all. At most, naturalists can say that it's not surprising that math applies to the world, because the world itself just happens to have a mathematical structure. So, of course,
No, the world itself has a logical structure, and we use mathematics to describe what it's the language of logic. It's how we make these logical constructs. So it's no surprising that the system that we've designed to map out the physical universe happened to work in our physical universe.
mathematics applies to it. But this explanation is unsatisfactory for two reasons. First, a great deal of mathematics and science cannot be physically realized. For example, imaginary numbers and infinite dimensional spaces. Although these concepts are useful, physical reality cannot possibly have the structure they describe. And second, this answer still doesn't explain why the physical universe has such a stunningly elegant mathematical...
Once again, this is like nothing. Like this is a big nothing burger. Like what are we getting at here? This is the best, and this is one of the, like, honestly, this is one of the most like world-renowned apologists. Like it's his network putting this together. And I'm sitting here with like no degrees, no nothing. And I'm like, this just, you're not saying anything. All you're doing is essentially trying to like, I don't know, appeal to like, look how marvelous this is. And you're just asserting over and over and over the exact same fucking point. And I'm like, can you get to like your God part? Like you mentioned God earlier. Can you like establish why that's a requirement? Why is God required?
structure.
Justify
By
it.
contrast, for theists, mathematics works so well in the physical world because God has chosen to create the world according to the plan he had in mind.
There you go. Problem solved. That's why math works, y'all. It's because God has chosen to create the world according to the plan that he had in mind. That's it. Has nothing to do with like physics, has nothing to do with, you know, the laws of logic and that kind of stuff. It's literally just because God's like, oh, this is what I wanted to do. Yeah, okay.
The first century Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria offered this analogy. When a king wants to build a city, a trained architect first designs in his mind
It's literally fucking, you know, every painter has a painting. Fucking Ray Comfort shit.
a plan of all the parts of the city that are to be completed. Then he begins to construct the city out of stones and timber, looking at the model and ensuring that the material objects are built according to the plan.
It's just weird that when you look out in nature, all you see is fucking trees and rocks and like rivers and lakes, all shit that just populates on its own. It like, you know, self-replicating or fucking just accrues as it fucking drifts through space. I don't like, what's the plan? Like, this is not, like, you're not establishing a God that's required. Every single thing that you're pointing to here is something that humans build and design. And you're just saying, well, math is to God, like, you know, the city is to humans. And it absolutely fucking is not. The only reason why, so if what you're saying is true, and you look out and you just see God's design everywhere, then when you look and you see those lakes and those trees and grass and stuff like that, you're like, oh my God, this is so intricately designed. I can't believe this. Then when somebody shows you a map like this, and it's like, it's got a stadium, it's got houses and everything else, you would just look at that and you're just like, oh, well, that's just created as well. And then when you walk out into the woods, if you legitimately believe this to the, like, legitimately did, you would have a difficult time explaining, like, how is a tree designed any differently than like a house. You wouldn't recognize things that are not designed. Like, and really it's not even, it's like human things are, designed as opposed to naturally occurring. Like if you walked out into the woods, you've never been there, you never seen like a map like this. Like, say you lived back in like, I don't know, the let's say like caveman days, and you're walking around and all of a sudden you see a house like this, you wouldn't know that it wasn't naturally occurring because you've never seen it before. You would only assume by like how it's shaped and structured and stuff like that. Like, well, like your caveman mind be like, oh, well, maybe people make like bivouacs or lean-tos or something. Then you kind of extrapolate it from there. But that's because you would recognize that design from seeing other things that have been designed. If you believe that everything was designed and that nothing exists without a designer, without an architect, then it would be like everything would be unremarkable to you.
Mathematics and physics work so well together because the same mind that designed the universe on a mathematical model also built the universe on the same mathematical model. All of this adds up to an argument for the existence of God that...
All right, I'm going to like lay something out real quick. This bothers me so much whenever they try to appeal to this. So remember what I was saying earlier, like most Christians will say that God cannot violate, most of them, especially if they're like a trained apologist, they'll say that God cannot violate the logical absolutes or something like that because they are part of his character, part of his nature. So they'll say that God cannot make a married bachelor, God cannot make a square circle, that sort of thing. So if God, and if you ever run into an apologist that says something like this and like, oh, it's part of God's nature and everything is like designed like this, and they're appealing to math, this is why they're like literally setting their own arguments up to like absolutely fail here. Okay. If you have a God that cannot violate the logical absolutes, and that God cannot violate the logical absolutes, therefore cannot make something like a squared circle. So what you're really saying is that God cannot violate the laws of mathematics for whatever reason. Well, if the laws of mathematics are the very things that like guide physics, and you say, well, God cannot tamper or alter, like can't fuck with mathematics, so God cannot mess with like physics. And if God cannot mess with physics, and physics are the things that guide the natural laws of nature itself, that's physics is why, like moving matter and motion, all this kind of stuff, falling back to mathematics, falling back to logic and the continuity of the universe, causality, cause and effect, that sort of stuff. That's why storms occur and everything else. Miracles, God intervening and changing things, violating natural law, would not be possible. Because if God violated natural law, that would be God violating the laws of physics. And if God violated the laws of physics, that would be God tampering with the laws of mathematics or mathematics itself. When we've already established that God cannot do something like make a squared circle because he cannot violate the laws of mathematics because those are part of his nature by his very nature. And if you say that he could tamper with those laws of mathematics or the laws of physics and that kind of stuff, then he could violate the logical absolutes, in which case like your entire belief system is 100% in fucking coherent.
That goes like this. If God does not exist, the applicability of mathematics is just a happy coincidence. But the applicability of mathematics is not just a happy coincidence. Therefore, God...
Oh yeah, and with no miracles, by the way, that's no resurrection, no fucking talking snake, no fucking talking donkey, no like miracling any shit with like Noah, no flood, no nothing. The entire fucking Bible is out of the fucking window just because of their insistence on relying and arguing that mathematics is part of God's nature. And as far as this bullshit right here, let's run through this real quick. All right, if God does not exist, the applicability of mathematics is just a happy coincidence, but the applicability of mathematics is not just a happy coincidence, therefore God exists. All right, so in number one, just strike out that very first part. I'm going to say the applicability of mathematics is just a happy coincidence, right? So if God does not exist, the applicability of mathematics is just a happy coincidence, okay? Then I would say, but the applicability of mathematics is just a coincidence. Therefore, no God exists. Bam. Killed God.
exists. Eugene Wigner was right. The effectiveness of mathematics in the physical world is quite literally a miracle.
It's quite literally
which is
not.
best explained by the existence of God.
It is quite... the absurd reliability of mathematics is not proof of God. And I think I just demonstrated that. William Lane Craig, I cannot believe this was like the best thing that your jabronis came up with. And it's like, on one hand, I want to be charitable and be like, well, Craig is generally a respectful person, that kind of stuff. No, fuck all that kind of shit with the apologetics. Like, this stuff is doing so much damage to our culture. This is doing so much damage to families. It is doing so much torment psychologically to children, indoctrinating them into fears of hell and this sort of stuff. I'm not okay with this shit. It's bullshit. They just are like literally like hand waving at numbers and be like, look, you're not smart enough to question this because all these scientists agree with us and math says that we're right. No, it fucking doesn't. All you did is sit here, special plead your case, provided no real justifications for anything, proof by assertion that, the applicability of mathematics demonstrates God's existence. Your three little premises argument right there was totally fucking pathetic. Anyway, if you enjoyed the content, please hit that like button. Leave a comment if you agree with me or if you disagree and you're like, Zoe, you know what? I think that you were a little off in this one. I think Craig, I think his point still stands and like you totally like just all your arguments, you just botched them. Whatever. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree, also let me know as well. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Tell me pretty lies.